Hello everyone. This is our first midweek encouraging word video from your pastor, and I hope this is maybe the last one we have to do. I hope we don't have to do this for too much longer. I want to get back to covenant groups and spending time in ordinary fellowship with everyone. But what I want to do is just give you one short follow-up thought nugget from the passage of Scripture that we studied on Sunday about Jesus' trial before the Jewish authorities and Peter's denial of Christ in the courtyard of the high priest. And maybe you can use this in some discussion. I sent you an email this afternoon with an attachment with some covenant group questions, some discussion questions like we normally use in covenant group. And you could use that tonight around your table with the folks in your home. If you live alone or if you're quarantined, you could make a phone call and talk to some of your Christ Covenant friend and go over these discussion questions with them, and that might be encouraging to you. So anyway, this past Sunday, we watched our worship service at home. It was pre-recorded, and thanks to Jonathan Knappenberger, who's actually sitting on the other side of the camera in my study right now and recording this, but he recorded our worship service, got it all mixed and posted it on our Facebook page. So I watched it with Allison on Sunday, which was kind of a weird experience, watching myself preach. And Eliza was there, and Colin, my son-in-law, and John and Christy Lang. And so we watched that. And as I was sort of building up to the final dramatic conclusion of my sermon, the video stopped. I thought it was maybe an internet problem, and I don't know if that was the case or not, but people began to make comments, and I'd said something like this right before my sermon ended. Let me give you some hope in this present trial we're going through together. During this trial, we'll face fears and temptations of various kinds. They'll be different for each of us. I could tell you to buck up, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This too will pass, that sort of thing. But let me leave you with something better. And so at that point it cut out, and I noticed there were some comments on Facebook. I liked Patty Hutchins the best. Patty said, "Mine stopped just before he shared the good thing. What was it?" So thank you, Patty, for paying such good attention to my sermon. So let me read you what I said. It was sort of my final concluding thought, and then I want to just elaborate on it briefly, and then I'll say goodbye. I was going to say, like Peter, we're probably going to respond with fear and not faith. And even when we do our best, it's not going to be pretty at times. But the good news is that Jesus Christ lived the life of courage and freedom that we should have lived. And not only does his life and perfection count for your record, he is also with you at all times through his Spirit. Trust him. He's the good and faithful witness. So just a thought about that, and let me elaborate. I find this very valuable. You know, in one sense, I think it'd be easy to read this passage of Scripture where John, contrasts Jesus' faithfulness with Peter's failure. And you could say that the lesson of this passage is, don't be like Peter, be like Jesus. Don't be prideful and don't be fearful, but be like Jesus and be the faithful and true witness. And boy, that seems like a pretty powerful lesson, but the problem is we are like Peter, and we aren't like Christ. And in some ways, the message, be like Jesus, is the most depressing message in the world. Who can be like Jesus? He's the perfect man. And so, but at the same time, I think we have this sense that, yes, Jesus is our example, and we are to be like him, and to strive to be like him. So how do we put those things together? Well, I think that the way we put those together is to remember the proper gospel order. And it goes like this. Jesus is not first of all our example. He's first our Savior. He's the great substitute. He stands in our place. Adam failed, and Jesus passed the test. Peter failed, and Jesus passed the test. You and I fail, and Jesus passed the test. He lived the perfect life that then we receive by faith, and that becomes our record, our credit before God. We stand before God in the perfect righteousness of Christ. So that's where we have to start, with that knowledge that Jesus alone is the one who passed it. No one can be like Jesus. Even Peter, the greatest disciple, wasn't like Jesus. But having said that and believed that and worked that into our hearts, then we ask, so how do we live? And the answer is, hey, Jesus is our example. And he's not just an example, he enables us by his Spirit to obey him. And so with that in mind, then we can look at this passage again and say, how should I live in these sorts of trying situations? And Christ is the only perfect man, but how does he want me to live, and how does he empower me to live in that way? So let me give this example. This illustration isn't perfect, but this may be helpful to you to think of it this way. Let's just imagine that you have to give a speech at an important occasion, and you're dreading this because you dread public speaking. You've never done it. You're terrified of it. And the worst thing is you think, I don't even have anything to say. I've got to make this speech. I don't have anything to say. And so you reach out to a friend of yours who's immensely talented public speaker and a brilliant person. And so he says, well, I'll write the speech for you. And so he writes the speech and he gives it to you, and you say, I can't give this speech. I don't know how. So he says, okay, you watch me. And he stands up in front of you and he gives this beautiful, dynamic speech. And then he gives you the paper back and he says, okay, I want you to practice. And you start stumbling and tripping over your words. And he says, okay, say it this way, slow down. And he coaches you through it. And then the event comes, and he's there in the audience, and you're so nervous, and you feel like it goes terrible, but you get through it. And at the end, people come up to you and you say, that was a really good speech. I appreciate that. And you look over at your friend, and he's just got a big smile on his face. Well, that's just, like I said, it's an imperfect illustration, but it gives us a sense of how we imitate Christ. He is our true friend. He's more than that. He's a substitute. He's lived the perfect life. He sets a great example that we can never perfectly follow. But if we do try to follow it, and we do attempt to live for him, even with the imperfections and the stumblings, he takes that into account, and he loves us and supports us in it. So I hope you have a chance tonight to reread this passage in John 18, Jesus' trial and Peter's denial, and work through that, maybe those covenant group questions. And Lord willing, I'll see you this coming Sunday on Facebook, and then shortly after that, we hope in a few Sundays we'll be back together on the Lord's Day, gathered in our beautiful sanctuary at 1310 St. Joseph Drive Northwest. Have a good evening. God bless you.